Grandma left me her old cabin instead of cash. The land beneath it changed everything. 3 minutes after my grandmother's will was read, my cousin leaned across the polished conference table and offered me $10,000 for the cabin everyone in my family had spent 20 years calling a rotting shack. He tried to make it sound generous. He said I would never have the money to repair the roof, that the road became impassable in winter, and that sentiment was a poor substitute for a bank account. My mother stared at the papers showing the $240,000 she had inherited. My Uncle Dean quietly folded the deed to Grandma's rental duplex into his briefcase, and I sat with a brass key in my palm, listening to them explain why the only place where Grandma had ever seemed truly happy was worth less than the used car parked outside. What none of them knew was that I had seen my cousin Travis enter the law office 40 minutes before the meeting, carrying an empty document tube. When he left, the tube was full. At the time, I did not understand what that meant. I only knew the offer came too quickly. The lawyer had barely finished explaining that Grandma had left me the structure known as Cedar House, together with the land legally attached to it, when Travis produced a handwritten purchase agreement. It named a company I had never heard of and described the property as approximately 2 acres. The price was $10,000, payable within 5 business days. He had even marked the line where I was supposed to sign. My grandmother, Evelyn Hale, had taught me never to sign anything presented by someone who also told me there was no need to read it, so I slipped the key into my purse and said I would think about it. The disappointment on Travis's face lasted less than a second. Dean's lasted even less, but I saw both. My family had expected me to be grateful for leftovers. That was the role I had occupied since childhood, the quiet granddaughter who helped wash dishes while everyone else discussed investments, the one who worked as a county records technician rather than joining Dean's real estate company, the one who rented a small apartment and drove a 12-year-old Subaru. Grandma never treated me as lesser, but she also never rescued me from the judgment. She had a way of watching people make choices and allowing those choices to become evidence. Her death came after a brief illness and a much longer period of preparation. She had sold her primary house 6 months earlier and moved into a care apartment near my mother. The cash from that sale became the inheritance my mother received. The duplex went to Dean. Travis inherited Grandma's investment portfolio, valued at almost $300,000. I received Cedar House, a 1-bedroom cabin without central heat, reliable electricity, or a bathroom built in this century. On paper, it looked unmistakably unequal. At the memorial luncheon, my mother took me aside and said Grandma had probably assumed the cabin mattered more to me because I had spent summers there. She framed it as kindness, but beneath her words was relief that I had not been given anything she considered important. Dean joined us and repeated that maintaining mountain property was expensive. He offered to have one of his crews clear it after I sold. Travis mentioned his buyer again. By dessert, the price had risen to $15,000, as though his sudden generosity were a clock I should fear. I asked why he wanted it. He said his company planned to renovate small cabins for vacation rentals. That answer would have sounded reasonable if Travis had ever renovated anything. His business history consisted mostly of placing his name on projects financed by Dean, collecting management fees, and disappearing when contractors asked to be paid. More importantly, Cedar House sat 4 miles beyond the nearest paved road. It had no view in summer because cedar trees enclosed it, no cellular service, and a spring that occasionally carried enough iron to stain the sink orange. It was the opposite of the glossy vacation rentals Travis promoted online. I declined again. The following morning, I drove north to see what I had inherited. Rain had softened the road into 2 muddy grooves, and blackberry vines dragged along the doors of my car. The cabin appeared only after the last turn, gray boards under a steep green roof, its porch leaning slightly toward the creek. Moss covered the stone chimney. One shutter hung crooked. The place looked smaller than I remembered, but when I stepped inside, the smell of cedar smoke and old books struck me so sharply that I had to grip the doorframe. Grandma had left the rooms almost untouched. Her enamel kettle sat on the stove. A red wool blanket covered the narrow couch. Pencil marks on the pantry wall measured me from age 6 through 15, when I had finally become taller than she was. My family saw decay. I saw the only years of my childhood in which no one had ranked me against anyone else. That did not make the cabin valuable. It only made it mine. I spent the day opening windows, photographing damage, and making lists. The roof needed replacement. The porch supports were failing. Mice had occupied one kitchen drawer. When I tested the hand pump, brown water coughed out before running clear. By late afternoon, my repair estimate had crossed $40,000, more than I had in savings. I was closing the shutters when I noticed fresh mud on the floor beside Grandma's writing desk. My own boots were dry because I had changed on the porch. The prints were broad, and one carried the distinctive broken Chevy tread of the expensive hiking shoes Travis wore to the memorial. The top drawer of the desk stood slightly open. Inside were empty folders labeled taxes, forestry, and survey. Someone had searched the cabin after Grandma died. I called the law office, but the attorney who had read the will was unavailable. His assistant confirmed that Travis had requested copies of public exhibits before the meeting. She could not explain which exhibits or why he had carried them away. I then called my supervisor at the county recorder's office and told her I needed to research a property I had inherited. She reminded me to use the public terminals and to document every search because I was personally interested in the result. The next morning, I began with the parcel number printed on the deed summary. No result appeared. That was unusual, but not impossible. Older rural properties often carried legal descriptions that predated modern parcel maps. I searched Grandma's name instead. Cedar House appeared in an index entry from 1978 when my grandfather bought it from a timber family called Bellwether Holdings. The scanned deed was 23 pages long. The first page described a cabin and surrounding home site. The following pages described something else entirely. The legal boundary began at a brass survey monument beside Alder Creek, climbed the ridge, crossed 2 sections of forest, and returned along an abandoned rail grade. I plotted the coordinates twice because the result made no sense. The land was not 2 acres. It was 186 acres. The final page contained the sentence that changed the temperature of the room around me. Grantor conveys all surface, subsurface, mineral, water, and access rights previously reserved without exception. Grandma had not inherited a cabin on a small lot. She had inherited the last intact piece of a 19th-century mineral claim, including everything beneath it. The modern tax map showed only the 2-acre home site because the remaining acreage had been coded as unassessed legacy forest after a boundary dispute in the 1980s. That did not erase ownership, but it buried the property in a system few people searched. I followed references through decades of documents, timber leases, abandoned easements, survey corrections, and mineral reservations. In 1996, my grandparents had placed most of the surface acreage under a conservation management agreement. They could harvest selectively and maintain roads, but not subdivide the forest. The agreement said nothing about subsurface extraction because, at the time, no one believed anything valuable remained. Then I found a memorandum recorded 11 months before Grandma died. It was between Evelyn Hale and North Star Elements, a mineral exploration company. The memorandum did not disclose financial terms, but it granted North Star a temporary right to conduct geological sampling on the property. Attached was a map marked with 6 bore sites. The brightest cluster sat directly beneath Cedar House. I knew enough about county records to understand what I did not know. A memorandum could represent serious negotiations or merely a speculative test. Mineral rights could be valuable, worthless, or impossible to use. I printed certified copies, then searched corporate records for the company named in Travis's purchase agreement. It had been formed 19 days earlier. Its registered agent was a lawyer who handled transactions for Dean's business. Its mailing address was a private mailbox 2 blocks from Travis's apartment. The $10,000 offer had never been generous. It had been a trap built before Grandma was buried. I did not call my family. I called Marisol Vega, a land use attorney who had once spent 6 months untangling a river access dispute for the county. I paid for an hour of her time and brought every record I had found. She read in silence, making small marks beside the legal description. When she reached the North Star memorandum, she asked whether anyone had pressured me to transfer the property. I placed Travis's agreement on her desk. Marisol's expression changed from professional interest to something colder. She explained that the cabin was the legal anchor for the original claim. In the 1978 deed, the home site contained the only recognized access point and the controlling survey monument. A transfer of the cabin and all land legally attached, as Travis's agreement phrased it, would likely include the full acreage and mineral estate, despite describing the parcel as approximately 2 acres. At best, the language was recklessly ambiguous. At worst, it was designed to make me surrender an asset without knowing what I owned. She advised me to sign nothing, change the locks, notify Northstar that title had transferred, and commission an independent survey. She also suggested I request Grandma's complete estate file rather than relying on the summary distributed at the reading. The attorney who handled the estate resisted. He said the file contained privileged correspondence and that Dean, as co-executor, needed to approve release. That was the first time I learned Dean was not merely a beneficiary. Grandma had named him co-executor beside an independent fiduciary from her bank. The banker had attended by video and said almost nothing during the reading. Marisol sent a formal demand. 2 days later, we received a digital folder containing appraisals, correspondence, and a sealed letter addressed to me. The letter was only 6 pages, written in Grandma's sharp block handwriting. She began without affection or apology. She said Cedar House had been undervalued for decades because its title was complicated and because she preferred it that way. In the spring before her death, Northstar had identified a deep brine formation containing commercially significant lithium. Early testing suggested the deposit might be among the most concentrated in the region. Nothing was guaranteed. Permits could fail, prices could change, extraction could damage the land if handled carelessly. But Northstar had offered her $12 million for full mineral ownership, and a competing company had discussed a long-term royalty arrangement, potentially worth far more. Grandma had rejected both. She wrote that money was not the secret she was leaving me. Choice was. She knew my mother would sell quickly because security mattered to her. She knew Dean would treat the deposit as a prize and the forest as packaging. She knew Travis would confuse possession with intelligence. She also knew I had spent years maintaining records that outlived the people who tried to manipulate them. She left me the land because I was the only person in the family who had ever asked what happened after someone signed. The final page warned me that Dean knew enough to be dangerous. Grandma had disclosed the exploration agreement when she asked him to help collect old surveys. She had not disclosed the test results or offers. Afterward, documents began disappearing from Cedar House, and Dean repeatedly urged her to transfer the property into a family company he controlled. She refused. If he learned Northstar's preliminary value, she believed he would pressure me before I understood the deed. Her last sentence was underlined twice. Do not let the size of the number make the decision for you. I cried only after I finished reading. Not because I might be rich, but because even in death, Grandma had described every member of our family with painful accuracy. She had trusted me, yet she had also placed me inside a test none of us had agreed to take. That evening, Dean called and said Travis's buyer had increased the offer to $25,000. He reminded me the estate still owed administrative costs and suggested the cabin might be assessed retroactively once county records were corrected. He predicted taxes, lawsuits, environmental liability, and bankruptcy. Each warning contained enough truth to sound responsible. Rural title corrections could trigger costs. Mineral properties carried risk. A conservation agreement could create obligations. But he spoke as if he had already studied the exact problems. I asked when he learned the property included 186 acres. The silence lasted so long I heard the faint scrape of his breath. Then he laughed and said old deeds often contained errors. He claimed Grandma had intended only the cabin to pass to me, while the outlying land belonged to the residual estate. I told him the will used the complete legal description by reference. He said we should meet as a family before outsiders made money from conflict. Within an hour, my mother called. Dean had told her I was accusing him of stealing land. She said grief was making me suspicious and reminded me how much he had done for Grandma. Travis sent a message saying his offer expired at midnight. I photographed every message and forwarded them to Marisol. The survey began the following week. Someone removed 2 temporary markers the first night. On the 3rd day, the crew found tire tracks leading to the old rail grade and a chain newly fastened across a road that legally belonged to the property. On the 5th, a drone captured Travis walking near one of Northstar's capped bore sites with 2 men in company jackets that did not carry Northstar's logo. Marisol obtained the estate communications. They showed Dean had contacted Northstar 4 days after Grandma entered hospice, introducing himself as the person who would soon control the property. Northstar refused to discuss terms without written authority. Dean then sent them a draft management agreement bearing what appeared to be Grandma's signature. The signature was wrong. Grandma always formed the second E in Evelyn like a closed loop. On the draft, it was open. I recognized the difference because I had cataloged hundreds of her notes while clearing her apartment. A handwriting expert later found tracing marks. The draft would have given Dean's company authority to negotiate mineral leases and collect a 15% management fee. It also contained an option allowing the company to purchase the entire property for $90,000 if Grandma died or became incapacitated. The option was dated 3 weeks before she entered hospice, yet its metadata showed the document had been created afterward on a laptop registered to Travis. The estate's independent co-executor immediately suspended Dean's authority and asked the probate court for instructions. That should have ended the pressure. Instead, it made my family louder. My mother arrived at my apartment unannounced with a folder of household bills. She said Dean had explained that the mineral story was probably exaggerated, but that litigation could consume everyone's inheritance. She wanted me to sign a family settlement transferring the land into a trust divided equally among the 3 branches of Grandma's family. In exchange, they would cover taxes and repairs. The proposal sounded fair until I read the management provisions. Dean would control all votes, select all consultants, and receive annual fees. I would contribute the property, everyone else would contribute promises. I asked my mother whether she had seen the forged agreement. She said Dean had made a paperwork mistake while trying to protect the family. Her answer hurt more than the attempted theft. She had spent my entire childhood teaching me that mistakes had consequences, but Dean's mistakes became misunderstandings the moment consequences approached him. I refused. She cried and asked whether money mattered more to me than family. I told her family had offered me $10,000 for land they knew might be worth millions. She said Travis was young and impulsive, though he was 34. She said Dean had been under pressure, though no one had pressured him to forge a signature. She left after telling me Grandma would hate what I was doing. For 2 days, I believed her. Then, North Star's project director requested a meeting. Dr. Asha Patel arrived with 2 geologists, an environmental engineer, and a presentation far less glamorous than the number in Grandma's letter. Their tests indicated a large lithium-bearing brine reservoir trapped nearly a mile below the ridge. Unlike an open-pit mine, extraction could use closed-loop wells that pumped brine, removed lithium, and returned the fluid underground. The surface footprint might be limited to 12 acres, but risks remained. Groundwater migration, road construction, noise, habitat disruption, and decades of monitoring. North Star offered 3 options. I could sell all mineral rights for $14 million. I could grant a 50-year lease with an upfront payment of $2 million plus royalties. Or I could allow another year of testing in exchange for $600,000 and retain the right to reject development. The largest immediate number made me feel physically unsteady. $14 million would erase every fear I had learned from watching bills accumulate on my mother's kitchen counter. It would buy homes, freedom, medical care, and the power to stop calculating grocery totals. But a sale would also transfer the most important decisions to people whose duty was to shareholders. I asked what Grandma had wanted. Asha said Grandma never told them. She asked questions about groundwater bonds, reclamation funding, union labor, tribal consultation, and who would own the data if the project failed. She had negotiated as though she might sign, then refused to move until a successor controlled the property. North Star had assumed that successor was Dean because he repeatedly claimed it would be. I authorized testing only, subject to stronger environmental safeguards Marisol would draft. The money was placed in escrow pending confirmation of title. I did not tell my family the amount. The completed survey confirmed every acre. It also revealed why the cabin mattered so much. The original brass monument lay beneath the stone hearth, installed before the cabin was built around it. The property's chain of title referenced that monument as the beginning point for every boundary and subsurface right. Remove the cabin from the legal description, and the mineral estate became difficult to locate. Transfer the cabin with all appurtenant rights, and the entire claim moved with it. Travis's agreement had used those exact words. He had known. We found proof in the document tube. The law office maintained security footage showing Travis copying the 1978 deed and the North Star memorandum before the will reading. He had obtained access through Dean's executor credentials. The handwritten agreement he placed before me was modeled on a template Dean's company had used to buy distressed rural land. Its corporate buyer was owned by Travis through 2 shell companies. Marisol filed a civil claim for attempted fraud and interference with inheritance. The bank fiduciary filed a separate petition concerning Dean's conduct as executor. Dean responded by challenging Grandma's competence. He argued she had suffered cognitive decline and that the will's unequal distribution proved undue influence by me. That accusation transformed my grief into something cleaner. During Grandma's last year, I visited her every Sunday. We played cards, organized photographs, and argued about whether her care apartment needed more plants. I had not known about the lithium. I had not asked for the cabin. Yet Dean portrayed those visits as a campaign to manipulate a confused woman. My mother signed an affidavit stating Grandma sometimes forgot appointments. Travis claimed he had heard her call me by my aunt's name. The medical records showed mild hearing loss and arthritis, not dementia. Her attorney had recorded the will signing after Dean first questioned her decisions. On the video, Grandma named the date, described every asset, explained why each beneficiary received what they did, and summarized the Cedar House title more accurately than Dean managed in his deposition. She also looked into the camera and said she expected someone to challenge her. The probate judge watched the video twice. Dean's attorneys then shifted strategies. They claimed the mineral rights belonged to the residual estate because Grandma's will referred to the cabin by its common address before incorporating the deed. Marisol produced the full legal description attached as Exhibit C. Dean claimed the exhibit had been added later. The estate lawyer produced a checksum showing the electronic document had not changed. Dean suggested Grandma's signature was unreliable. That was an astonishing argument from the man who had submitted a traced version of it to Northstar. The hearing lasted 4 days. I sat behind Marisol while my family described me as naive, vindictive, unstable, and greedy. Their story depended on 2 incompatible claims. The land was a worthless burden I should surrender, and it was so valuable Grandma could not possibly have intended me to own it alone. On the final afternoon, Marisol asked Dean when he first learned lithium might exist beneath Cedar House. He said he had heard rumors after Grandma died. She displayed an email he had sent to Travis 7 months earlier. The subject line read, "Project White Ground." Attached was a map of Grandma's bore sites and a spreadsheet modeling royalties at several lithium prices. In the email, Dean wrote that Evelyn was being stubborn, but that Rowan will fold for 20 grand once she sees the roof. I did not look at him. I looked at my mother. Her face seemed to collapse inward. Until that moment, she had been able to believe every explanation he gave her. The email removed the last place where belief could hide. Dean had known the potential value. He had predicted my inheritance. He and Travis had planned the low offer before Grandma died. The judge ruled from the bench 2 weeks later. The cabin, acreage, mineral estate, water rights, and access rights passed to me under the will. Dean was removed as co-executor and ordered to repay the estate for fees charged after he began acting against it. The court referred the forged management agreement to the district attorney and preserved my civil claims. It also ordered Dean and Travis to stay off the property. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited because Northstar's exploration filings had become public. Travis called the decision a technicality. Dean said families often discussed informal ways to consolidate property. My mother left through a side door. Winning did not feel like the moment revenge stories promise. No music rose. No one applauded. I stood on courthouse steps with legal bills approaching $100,000 and understood that the people who had called me family had tried to turn my trust into a purchase discount. The testing payment covered my fees after title cleared. I used part of the remainder to stabilize the cabin, repair the roof, and restore the spring house. I hired local contractors rather than Dean's crews. I also hired an independent hydrogeologist, a tribal cultural resources consultant, and a conservation economist. Northstar objected to some costs, then agreed when I made them conditions of continued access. For the first time, everyone courting me had to answer questions rather than wave numbers. The deeper studies made the deposit more valuable. They also made extraction more complicated. The richest section lay beneath a migration corridor and close to an aquifer feeding 3 towns. Closed-loop technology reduced risk, but did not erase it. A poorly sealed well could contaminate groundwater. Heavy construction could fragment habitat. The county, hungry for jobs, promoted the project before any permit existed. Speculators began buying nearby land. Strangers mailed me offers. One investor sent flowers to Grandma's grave. Dean's criminal investigation moved slowly. The district attorney charged him with attempted fraud, forgery, and misuse of executor authority. Travis was charged with conspiracy and falsifying corporate records. Both accepted plea agreements after forensic examiners recovered deleted drafts and messages. Dean received probation, restitution, and a prohibition against serving as a fiduciary. Travis received community service and a suspended sentence. Neither went to prison. My relatives called that proof the matter had been exaggerated. They ignored the fact that leniency came partly because I asked prosecutors to prioritize restitution over incarceration. My civil case settled differently. Dean surrendered the management fees he had taken from the estate and transferred a forest parcel he owned beside Grandma's land. Travis paid what he could and signed a judgment for the balance. The settlement included a written admission that they knew Cedar House potentially controlled valuable mineral rights when they offered to buy it from me. I required that sentence because families are skilled at rewriting theft as conflict once enough time passes. My mother did not speak to me for 5 months. Then she mailed a box containing the photographs from Grandma's apartment and a letter admitting she had chosen the version of events that protected her brother. She did not ask forgiveness. She said she had spent her life believing peace meant keeping Dean calm and that she had mistaken my silence for permission to sacrifice me. I read the letter at the cabin and placed it in Grandma's desk. I was not ready to answer, but I no longer needed to destroy it. North Star returned with a revised proposal after 18 months of study. The deposit was larger than their first estimate. They offered $4 million up front, escalating royalties, local hiring guarantees, and a reclamation bond. Their projected payments over 30 years could exceed $60 million. The number traveled through town before the proposal reached my hands. County officials called. Economic development groups invited me to private dinners. People who had never remembered my job now described me as a visionary landowner. Relatives who had supported Dean sent messages about Grandma's desire to keep wealth in the family. One aunt suggested I establish education funds for all the cousins. Travis, still making payments under the judgment, emailed a business plan for managing royalty income. I declined every meeting until my advisors finished reviewing the science. The conclusion was uncomfortable. The project could create hundreds of jobs and supply a mineral used in batteries, but North Star's proposed well field was too close to the aquifer recharge zone. Their engineers believed the risk was manageable. My independent experts believed the models relied on insufficient data. The choice was not between greed and purity. Refusing the project would not stop demand for lithium. It might shift mining to a place with weaker protections. Approving it could benefit the region while placing the most direct environmental risk on communities that had not inherited a vote. Grandma's warning returned to me. Do not let the size of the number make the decision. I created a land stewardship foundation and transferred the mineral estate into it, retaining a life interest but surrendering my ability to sell it alone. The foundation's board included a hydrogeologist, a representative chosen by the downstream towns, a tribal representative, 2 local workers, a conservation specialist, and me. Any extraction agreement required a supermajority, independent monitoring, public data, and automatic shutdown thresholds. At least half of net royalties would fund regional water protection, vocational training, and permanent conservation. My attorneys called the structure unusually restrictive. North Star called it difficult. Dean called it insane. That was how I knew I was finally making my own decision. The foundation offered North Star a smaller pilot zone farther from the aquifer, with no permanent development until 5 years of monitoring showed stability. In exchange, the company received a path to a larger lease if it met strict standards. The upfront payment dropped from $4 million to $1.5 million. The projected royalties fell dramatically. The company negotiated for 6 months, walked away, returned after a competitor accepted similar terms elsewhere, and finally signed. I was not instantly transformed into the richest person in the county. After taxes, legal reserves, foundation funding, and repair costs, I had enough to buy a comfortable home and never fear an emergency bill again. I kept my job for another year, then moved into consulting on historical land records and mineral title research. The work mattered more, now that I understood how easily buried documents could shift power. The cabin remained a cabin. I replaced the porch with cedar milled from trees removed during road restoration. I kept the old stone hearth, including the brass monument beneath it. I repaired the pantry wall without sanding away the pencil marks. The first winter after restoration, snow covered the access road and trapped me there for 3 days. I heated soup on the stove, read Grandma's field notebooks, and felt wealthier than I had at any bank meeting. Her notebooks revealed the part of the story no court record contained. Grandpa had bought Cedar House because he believed an old silver claim might remain beneath the ridge. He spent years searching and found nothing. After he died, Grandma kept the property not because she expected treasure, but because the forest had become the one place no family member tried to manage her. When North Star approached decades later, she distrusted the sudden interest. She learned geology, mineral law, and groundwater science in her 80s. She attended public hearings 2 counties away to watch how other landowners negotiated. She was not protecting a fortune she understood from the beginning. She was teaching herself enough to avoid being hurried. One entry mentioned me. She wrote that Rowan reads footnotes and does not confuse an offer with an obligation. Beneath that, she added, "I hope the land gives her room to become louder." I answered my mother after reading those words. We met at a cafe rather than the cabin. I told her reconciliation would require more than regretting Dean's exposure. She needed to acknowledge her own choices without using him as an excuse. She did. Not perfectly, and not all at once. Over the following year, we rebuilt something smaller and more honest than the relationship we had pretended to have before. She visited Cedar House the next spring. When she saw the restored rooms, she touched the pencil marks on the pantry wall and cried. She admitted she had always disliked the cabin because Grandma behaved differently there, less willing to accommodate, less impressed by money, less available for family demands. My mother had interpreted that freedom as rejection. I told her I thought Grandma had been trying to model a life none of us understood. We planted 2 cedars beside the porch. Dean never apologized. His real estate company lost clients after the criminal case, and he eventually sold the duplex he inherited to cover debts. He told relatives I had destroyed a family business over a misunderstanding. The recorded admission in our settlement prevented that version from becoming official, but it did not prevent people from choosing it. I learned that evidence can establish facts without controlling loyalty. Travis tried once to visit. The gate camera showed him holding a bottle of wine and an envelope. I spoke through the intercom and reminded him of the no-entry order still attached to the settlement. He said he wanted to make peace. When I asked whether peace included paying the remaining judgment, he returned to his car. The envelope later arrived by mail. Inside was a proposal for me to forgive his debt in exchange for introducing me to investors. I forwarded it to Marisol and went back to staining the porch. I assumed the settlement would be the last document Dean used against the property. 6 months later, a title company called Marisol about an easement that had appeared in a private investment package. The easement purported to grant Dean's former development company permanent access across Cedar House land for mineral support and transportation. It carried a notary stamp, Grandpa's name, and a date from 1987. If genuine, it could allow a third party to place a road through the center of the proposed conservation zone. If sold to North Star's competitor, it could also make our carefully negotiated pilot impossible. The document had never been recorded, which Dean's attorney claimed was an oversight. He said it had been discovered in an old storage unit after the criminal case and transferred to a group of investors who had previously lent Dean money. Those investors now demanded either access or $2 million to release the easement. For one terrible afternoon, I believed Grandma had missed something. Her files contained thousands of pages, but no land record is perfect. Grandpa had pursued mining rumors and could have signed an agreement she never knew about. The signature resembled his. The paper appeared aged. Even the notary had existed. Then I remembered the hearth. The easement's legal description began at the brass monument, moved north along the old logging road, and crossed Alder Creek at a concrete culvert. County road records showed that culvert had not been installed until 1994, 7 years after the document was supposedly signed. The description also referred to Cedar House by its modern emergency address, assigned in 2002. Whoever created the easement had aged the paper and copied an old signature, but they had built the route from a current map. Marisol traced the investor's purchase payment to a debt Dean owed from a failed hotel project. Rather than repay them with money, he had sold them a weapon aimed at my title. Forensic testing found printer toner embedded beneath artificial discoloration. The notary stamp came from a seal reported lost after the notary died. One of Travis's old cloud backups contained the easement as an editable file. The investors withdrew their demand and sued Dean. The district attorney reopened his case for violating the terms of his plea. This time, I did not ask for leniency. Dean spent 4 months in county detention and emerged still telling people that I had chosen land over family. What surprised me was how little satisfaction I felt. I had once imagined consequences would restore balance. Instead, each consequence revealed another amount of damage that could not be repaid. Dean had mortgaged his reputation, his company, his relationship with his sister, and finally his freedom, because he could not accept that Grandma had chosen someone else. No judgment could return the version of him my mother had believed in. The forged easement delayed the pilot almost a year, but the delay produced one unexpected benefit. At a public title hearing, residents learned that several old access roads around the ridge had similarly unclear ownership. Families who had used those roads for generations feared North Star would close them. Recreational groups feared the opposite, that industrial traffic would take over. The conflict could have become a competition in which the best-funded lawyer won. The foundation paid for a regional boundary study and invited every affected landowner to review the records. My old office helped locate unscanned plats. Retired surveyors identified monuments hidden beneath brush. We discovered one road belonged to the county, another to a dissolved timber cooperative, and a third had become a public way through decades of use. The final agreement protected residential and emergency access while sending industrial vehicles along a separate route. At the signing, an elderly neighbor named Mr. Holloway told me Grandma had once spent an entire winter helping his father fight a timber company that blocked their road. He said she never mentioned it because she considered accurate boundaries a form of good manners. Knowing where your rights ended, she believed, was how you avoided taking someone else's. That idea became the foundation's operating rule. Before any drilling, we mapped not only ownership but consequence. Wells, streams, nesting sites, cultural areas, school bus routes, hunting grounds, and places emergency crews could not easily reach. North Star's first plan treated the landscape as blank space around a deposit. The revised plan treated the deposit as one layer inside an occupied place. It cost more, it took longer, it also survived regulatory review with fewer objections because people could see where their lives appeared on the map. The county executive who had once pressured me to approve the full project later praised the collaborative process in a campaign advertisement. I found the hypocrisy irritating until Marisol pointed out that public officials repeating our standards was better than them opposing those standards. I was learning that stewardship rarely offered the clean emotional victories of a courtroom. Sometimes progress arrived wearing the face of someone taking credit. My mother attended those hearings without sitting beside me. At first, she stayed in the back row and left before the end. Eventually, she began volunteering at the sign-in table. She never asked to join the foundation or influence the money. Her restraint did more to rebuild trust than any speech could have. When a reporter once asked whether she supported my decision, she said the land belonged to me and the consequences belonged to many people, so her job was to listen. That answer sounded like something Grandma might have written. The pilot wells began operating 3 years after Grandma's death. They were quiet compared with the mine people imagined, a cluster of low buildings, pipes, and monitoring stations beyond the ridge. Every measurement appeared online in near real time. Local apprentices trained beside engineers. The foundation purchased conservation easements on neighboring properties and restored a damaged wetland along Alder Creek. When one monitoring well showed an unexpected pressure change, operations stopped automatically for 6 weeks. North Star complained about lost production, but followed the agreement. That shutdown justified every dollar I had supposedly sacrificed. The first royalty distribution was large enough to make news. I received a portion through my life interest, but more went to the foundation. The downstream towns replaced aging water lines. A community college opened a program in geothermal and mineral processing technology. The tribal council funded cultural site mapping that identified places overlooked by state records. None of those outcomes erased the risk or made extraction virtuous by definition. They proved only that ownership could be exercised as responsibility rather than appetite. At the foundation's first public meeting, a reporter asked whether I regretted not taking North Star's $14 million purchase offer. Before I could answer, a man in the audience said anyone turning down that money was either foolish or already rich. 3 years earlier, the comment would have embarrassed me. I would have softened my answer so no one thought I considered myself important. Instead, I explained that a sale price is not the same as value. $14 million would have paid me once and removed my ability to protect the land. The agreement we built paid less at first, demanded more work, and left open the possibility that extraction would end. It also kept the water, data, jobs, and future choices tied to the people living with the consequences. The reporter printed only part of that answer, but I no longer needed the entire world to understand. On the 4th anniversary of Grandma's death, the family gathered for a small memorial at my mother's house. Dean did not attend. Travis was not invited. My aunt brought a pie. My mother displayed one of Grandma's quilts. Conversation stayed careful until someone mentioned the latest lithium price, and then looked at me with the familiar curiosity people reserved for a bank account they could not see. I changed the subject to Grandma's notebooks. For once, my mother helped. She told the story of Grandma driving alone to a mining hearing at 82 and correcting a lawyer who underestimated her. Laughter replaced calculation. The evening did not heal everything, but it allowed Grandma to exist as more than the woman who distributed assets. Later, my mother handed me a small envelope she had found behind a drawer in Grandma's old dresser. It contained a photograph of Cedar House taken in 1979. Grandma stood on the unfinished porch in work boots, holding a hammer. On the back, she had written that a house was not what sheltered you from weather, it was what gave you a place from which to refuse. I framed the photograph and hung it above the writing desk. People still summarize my inheritance as a lucky discovery. They imagine I accepted a worthless cabin, lifted a loose floorboard, and found treasure. The truth is less magical and more important. The value was documented in deeds, surveys, memoranda, and test results. Dean found those records before I did. Travis understood enough to create a company and draft an agreement. They did not fail because the secret was impossible to find. They failed because they assumed I would believe their description instead of reading my own inheritance. The land beneath Cedar House changed everything, but not in the way my family expected. It gave Dean an opportunity to reveal what control meant to him. It gave Travis a chance to price my trust. It forced my mother to choose between comfort and truth. It gave me money, certainly, but money was the simplest part. The deeper change was learning that quietness and weakness were never the same. I had spent years allowing other people to finish my sentences because correcting them felt exhausting. I let relatives call my work clerical because explaining public records sounded defensive. I accepted the smallest seat at tables and told myself I preferred the edge. Grandma saw that habit and left me something that could not survive unless I spoke clearly, asked difficult questions, and tolerated other people's anger. Sometimes I wonder whether that was fair. She could have warned me directly. She could have exposed Dean, sold the rights, divided the money, and spared me years of litigation. But then I read her notebooks and understand that she did not know which choice was right. She knew only that selling would make the choice irreversible, and that I was the person most likely to protect time for a better answer. The old brass key from the will reading now hangs beside the front door, though it no longer fits the new lock. I keep it because it reminds me how my inheritance first felt in my hand, small, cold, and almost embarrassing beside everyone else's checks and deeds. Travis offered $10,000 for it before I understood what it opened. He thought the cabin was the lock and the land was the prize. He was wrong about that too. The real lock was the story my family had told about me, that I was impractical, passive, grateful for scraps, and easily frightened by numbers. Grandma gave me a key, then trusted me to discover the door myself. Beneath the cabin lay lithium, water, history, risk, and enough money to change several generations. Beneath all of that lay a decision about who I would become once everyone had shown me who they already were. I kept the cabin. I kept the land. And, for the first time, I kept the right to define what either one was worth.